My name is Courtney Mooney. I'm a senior architectural historian for Broadbent and Associates, Inc. We're an environmental firm with a cultural resource management component based out of Reno, Nevada. As Samantha mentioned, I'm a recent transplant to Arizona. The research behind the Sagecrest Drive-in Theater presentation grew out of Broadbent's ongoing work supporting the Anaconda Copper Mine land disposal and Anaconda Public Lands remediation projects in Yerington, Nevada, which began in 2018. And as part of this effort, Broadbent's cultural resources team conducted a range of studies to document and evaluate historic resources associated with the site and the surrounding community. So thank you for attending, and I hope you all enjoy what we dug up. I want to start with a brief kind of history of drive-in theaters in the United States. And so you can see the evolution. The concept of an outdoor movie theater in which one could enjoy a movie and snacks with friends in a private vehicle was formed in the early 1930s by a young entrepreneur named Richard M. Hollingshead Jr. from Riverton, New Jersey. And this was during the early years of the Great Depression. And Hollingshead recognized that entertainment and movies in particular was really one of the last things that families sacrificed out of their tight budgets. Even during the most severe years of the Great Depression, an estimated 60 to 80 million Americans went to movies each week. And, they were it was a relatively inexpensive form of entertainment. Hollingshead also noted that there were challenges such as, available or inexpensive parking, access to babysitters, and the difficulties of dressing up that prevented some people from going to the movie theater. We also found references suggesting that his mother was a larger woman who couldn't fit into the indoor theater seats. And this inspired his drive to devise more comfortable accommodations for people of a certain size. Hollingshead began to experiment with the methods of outdoor movie watching. His neighbors must have thought he was nuts. So using a 1928 Kodak projector that he set on top of his car, parked in the driveway of his home, he projected films onto a screen nailed onto a tree. A home radio was placed behind the screen to provide sound, and a lawn sprinkler was employed to simulate rain. And he quickly saw that vehicles in front of his car would block his view, so he started to think about ways to cant the vehicles using blocks under the front tires. He settled on a series of level rows on an incline with retaining walls or another method of bracing to provide unobstructed views of the screen and prevent the vehicle from rolling out of its stall and squishing the people in front of it. His design would require a large lot located adjacent to a main road or highway that was accessible to cars. He settled on a sort of irregular fan-shaped layout with a large screen placed near the road, but oriented away from it to prevent headlights from shining on the screen. And a screen house, which we now call projection room, was placed far enough away to not be impacted by foreign sources of light. And he also recommended a solid fence line or trees to keep freeloaders from viewing the screen without a ticket, and again, reducing outside light. In his layout, cars would enter a gateway after having passed a ticket booth on one side of the property. Then they would select a spot along a row from one side. After the film, cars would exit the property on the opposite side. He submitted his first patent in 1932 and worked with a screen supply company to produce a large screen and projector that could, quote, throw a movie across the required distance. The RCA Victor company produced a system of speakers that would cover the entire property. And once his patent was granted in 1933, he constructed the very first drive-in movie theater, the Automobile Movie Theater in Pennsauken, New Jersey, which was shown on the previous slide. And he assigned ownership to his newly formed company, Park-In Theaters, Inc. The opening movie was the 1932 release Wives Beware, also known as Two White Arms, and a variety of accompanying shorts. Hollingshead, his approved patent required licensing agreements between any entity opening a drive-in in the entire United States and his company. And this would prove to be unmanageable as it resulted in several lawsuits by companies owning or leasing drive-ins who just flat out refused to enter into this agreement. Um, and this kind of started the patent wars. Within a few months of Hollingshead's patent approval, another drive-in patent was filed by architect Louis P. Josserin in Houston, Texas. Josserin. Josserin's design for the radiating parking rows strayed a bit from Hollingshead's, as instead of a formal stallways with retaining walls, he provided raised berms with rounded tops known as drive-over ramps. And I think that those are kind of, at least in my experience, more common than having like retaining walls. All other components of Josserin's design mimicked those of Hollingshead. Josserin's patent was challenged by yet another inventor, Herbert Taylor Jr., with Josserin declared the winner. This was the beginning of, again, the long patent fights combined, and this combined with the pushback on having to obtain licensing agreements from park-in theaters. And apparently indoor theater owners were talking smack about the drive-ins. So this kind of resulted in a slow start to drive-in theaters around the country. However, in the early 40s, it had become clear to speculative investors that the era of the car had begun in the United States, and many were eager to jump on this trend. So the phrase drive-in had yet to be qualified, as the concept of driving into or through an establishment was still being explored and defined. Although gas stations had technically been considered drive-ins, since 1913. And the idea was being broadly tested in banks, restaurants, commercial businesses, and now movies. And so as a result, it became necessary to add a qualifier, like a drive-in restaurant or drive-in movie theater. But importantly, the concept of not having to get out of your car for dining, shopping, or entertainment was catching on. In 1946, just over 100 drive-in theaters existed in the United States. This increased to over 1,000 by 1949 and more than 3,000 by the mid-1950s. Mr. Hollingshead's patent was denied in 1949 by the First Circuit Court of Appeals, which determined his design was unpatentable and lacking invention and was therefore invalid. So this also removed the licensing requirements, and it started a boom for drive-in theaters around the country. In Nevada, the first drive-in was the Motor Inn Midway Drive-In, opened on Virginia Street in 1946 at the current site of the Pepper Mill Hotel and Casino. When it first opened, the layout of the rows and screen, projection equipment, access roads really seemed to follow Hollingshead's design. Typical of the post-war era in drive-in theater technology, thanks to relaxed materials restrictions, the Motor Inn offered individual car speakers. So this ad on the right for the opening of the Blue Mound Road Drive-In in Wisconsin promotes in-car speakers manufactured by RCA. You can see in the lower right how the speaker was attached via a cord to a post, and you could bring the speaker into your car. RCA boasted that the new sound system extended the length of the operating season, confines sound to the theater parking area, and permits individual control of sound volume. And this was really important because drive-in theaters were really facing a lot of community noise complaints. So the in-car speakers had become ubiquitous within the industry. Screen technology was also updated during the post-war period. Prior to 1956, screens were constructed and designed kind of ad hoc, framed in wood and covered with a painted white canvas. In 1948, the first all-steel screen support structure, designed by Elizabeth Ironworks, Inc. in Elizabeth, New Jersey, was erected in Tottawa, New Jersey for Eastern Drive-in theaters. And these were prefabricated and could be constructed in 6 days. They also could withstand winds of up to 100 miles per hour. They sloped gently towards the audience rather than at a 90-degree angle to the ground to prevent keystoning, which is when the projected image is wider on the top than the bottom. And they were technically portable and came in 3 sizes. The ad on the left shows the prefab screen by Elizabeth Ironworks. The ad in the middle is for a competing steel prefab design by Maycomer Inc. in Canton, Ohio, 1950. And the image on the right is of the screen at the Sagecrest Drive-in in Yerington. This screen was constructed in 1954, and while it's not really an example of either design, it's clear that it followed the latest in screen tech with a steel prefab structure and canted screen. Some drive-in theaters offered comfort amenities such as in-car heaters, windshield protectors, and antifreeze solutions to keep windshields clean and ice-free during inclement weather. Mobile vending carts brought fresh hot dogs and drinks to the patrons as they watched the movie, and some even offered laundry and grocery services. So theaters at this time really began embracing families. They were providing child-specific amenities like play spaces, and these were often, located next to the concession stand. And these included a variety of play equipment, and even like small boat rides and pony rides. Some theaters offered free bottle warming services, diapers, and other infant care items. And as more families began to visit the drive-ins, parents would send their children to the play area so they could enjoy the movie and maybe some alone time in peace. Some theaters even hired nurses to attend to the children. The image on the left is a typical drive-in plan for a multiple enterprise amusement center published by a trade magazine in 1946. The image shows the theater as part of a multi-use complex with a playground situated quite far from the theater area. And let me see if I can grab this laser. It's over here, kind of, behind the screen and out of view of the parents. The interesting part is that this typical plan shows the theater as part of a multi-use complex. With the restaurant, nightclub, bowling alley, shops, grocery store, health clinic, bus terminal, gas station, and even a drive-in milk bar, whatever that is. The image on the right is from the mid-1950s and features a playground for the 303 Drive-in Theater in Orangeburg, New York. This one seems larger and more elaborate than others, has a secure fence and a variety of play equipment. And of course, it's right next to the concession stand, which seems to make sense. Another critical and emerging feature of the drive-in was the neon sign advertising the showings. In order to catch the eye of the passing motorist, it was necessary to have this large, bright, flashing sign and marquee near the theater's entrance. The example shown on the left is the sign for the Elko Motor View Drive-In. The sign featured a lot of common elements, such as a directional arrow, an automobile motif, chasing in neon lights, and a large marquee. The sign and theater are no longer extant. The images on the right are of the current entrance sign and lighted arches for the West Wind Drive-In in Las Vegas, Nevada, opened in 1966. And this sign still features its lighted starburst at the top with an arrow and neon letters and lighted marquee. Initially, drive-in theaters were placed in developed, sometimes fairly urban areas, and this resulted, again, in complaints about the noise from speakers, glare from the screens, and the additional traffic. So in 1948, the American Association of State Highway Officials, AASHO, established guidelines to address traffic safety concerns, mostly backup at the ticket booth extending into the major roadways, and they published their recommendations the following year. Despite their publication, it's not really clear whether there were any noticeable effects on safety. However, complaints resulted eventually in more drive-ins being placed outside of towns along the main highways. And this appealed to the post-war car culture because families were looking for a Sunday drive. They can pack the whole family in the car and drive out to the drive-in. Interestingly, the Nevada drive-ins included in our report do not necessarily follow this trend. We found that 8 drive-ins were initially constructed in rural or semi-rural areas between 1946 and 1975, and seven drive-ins were constructed in what could be called urban or mostly urban areas, basically within the same time period. So this is about the time when the drive-ins started to kind of decline. At the end of the 1950s, this is when stuff got weird. This is, the big and fantastical attractions were they'd run their course as marketing strategies, and this caused operators to shift their attention to a teenage and older demographic. They shed their family-friendly images and more began to incorporate PG-13R and X-rated films into their programs, as well as alternative programming like swap meets, flea markets, park and rides, and other community events. Theft and vandalism were increasing. Teenagers were using theaters for trysts. There was basically a lot of shenanigans going on. And additionally, although this is hotly debated amongst the drive-in theater historians, all 2 of them, the increase of television sets in the home, especially in the mid-50s, is considered a major factor in the decline of drive-in attendance. Sorry, I can't seem to turn my laser off. Okay. So an ad from 1956 for the Motor View Drive-in in Las Vegas promoted Mom and Dad, and this was released in 1945 as a sex hygiene film known for its graphic content, including depictions of live births, mutilated body parts, and various diseases, and children under 16 were not allowed without their parents. Sex hygiene or sexploitation films blended education with exploitation. They focused on menstrual education and STD warnings to address post-war morality. These films often served as or were derived from sensationalized roadshow pictures like Mom and Dad, pictured here, which grossed millions by presenting cautionary tales about premarital sex and hygiene, often with moralistic, gendered, and at times bold, provocative imagery meant to warn. Not surprisingly, by the 1960s, children's playgrounds were being removed, especially those located within view of the screen. And I wanted to show there's just a really quick clip here. Oh, that's how it works. For Mom and Dad. It happens every night somewhere. There's supposed to be sound with this, but it's fine. It's not. Just imagine a full band. You'll gasp, you'll wince, you'll shudder. Fearless. So it goes on pretty much the same. And it's really, it played well into the 1950s. So another genre of film that theaters were resorting to was the horror slasher, softcore pornography, and monsters. And one reviewer described it as blood, breasts, and beasts. These were visceral, low budget, and often campy films characterized by practical gore and cult appeal, anything to get your date to jump into your arms for safety. There were complications, however. A comment on a Facebook post about the Sunset Drive-in in Las Vegas mentions that the venue had become an adult theater in its later years, and the Facebook poster and his young siblings would watch the films from their backyard. So it didn't help that most drive-ins typically only had access to second or third run showings of major Hollywood films, and they were struggling to compete with the indoor theaters that had access to the first run films. Increased film rental prices, along with growing incidences of theft and vandalism, raised the prices for drive-ins. The Sagecrest Drive-in in Yerington had no less than 8 incidents of theft and vandalism between 1963 and 1992, including a fire and some speaker theft. By the late 1970s, these costs were being passed on to the customer through increased admission prices, and that was, they were getting close to the indoor theater prices. And in-car speakers were stolen so frequently that it was just really hard to maintain. Some theaters attempted to combat this by adding multiple screens to increase the type and number of movies they could show during the open season. Screen and audio upgrades, such as the in-car radio signals, greatly improved the auditory experience. However, a lot of these rural theaters didn't really have the population to do these upgrades, so they either kind of lagged behind the others in technology or had to close altogether. The El Rancho Sparks Drive-in was advertising 3 screens in 1973. By 1980, and you can see the aerial images from 1956. So, a little less than 20 years, they had 3 screens. By 1980, they had grown to their current size of 4 screens. And you can also see the development growth around the theater in these 2 images. And, this urban encroachment really was kind of an impetus to sell a lot of these drive-ins because, the price had increased because, people needed the land. And by the 1980s, the drive-in theaters were in full decline. So now I'll show you some of the Nevada drive-in theaters. We were able to find 15, and, there could still be some that we missed, but hopefully not. They were all constructed between 1946 and 1975. And let's get into it. So the first thing we did was while we're doing our research, is we created a spreadsheet. It has names, locations, owners of record, opening, closing years, number of screens, whether they were in largely urban or rural setting when constructed, and then what the material remains and condition are currently. We found that the theaters were largely split between rural and urban, as I mentioned before. 13 started with 1 screen, with 3 growing to multiple screens. Only two theaters, the Spooner Drive-in in Carson City and the Desert 5 Drive-in in Las Vegas, were constructed with more than one screen and parking area. And both of these were opened in the early mid to 1970s when, the theaters were doing this. They were growing so that they could maximize their profits by fitting in as many screens as possible. In larger urban areas, these areas had more drive-ins, obviously because they had higher populations. Of the 15, only 2 remain open, and that's the West Wind in Las Vegas and the El Rancho West Wind Sparks theaters, both with the same owner. 8 have no material remains, and 5 have some remains, such as the outline of berms or some buildings and or structures. We also reviewed the layout of each of the theaters between those years, and we developed a plan typology for Nevada theaters based on these layouts, so we could see if any of these were influenced by larger national trends. And although we didn't really do extensive research on drive-in theater plan types across the US, the plan types observed in Nevada are believed to be fairly typical based on advertisements and articles regarding efficient and cost-effective methods of circulation, that were being promoted with trade publications. And then we were also looking at historic images. Plan type 1 is closest to Hollingshead's design. It consists of an irregular fan shape with parking berms that radiate out from the screen, but are constrained by parcel boundaries. There are 5 Plan type 1 drive-ins in Nevada. They're all built between 1946 and 1966. Moviegoers were directed along a one-way drive, encircling the outer edges of the bermed rows, and then they would enter on the opposite side. The image on the screen is the Motor Inn Midway Drive-in in Reno from 1966, and this eventually became an indoor theater and is now parking for the Peppermill Casino. Additional Type 1s in Nevada include the Motor View Drive-in in Elko and the Mineralite Drive-in in Hawthorne, the Sunset Drive-in in North Las Vegas, and the Motor View Drive-in in Ely. I'm sorry, some of these aerials are a little blurry, but you can kind of see the shape of the original drive-in. Plan type 2 drive-ins have a classic fan shape wherein the parking berms radiate out from the screen. The projection booth and concession stand is set in the center of the berms. And the ticket booth, these closely follow the Jocelyn patent design. The ticket booth and main entrance are set behind the screen, and circulation is located along the outer edges of the fan. There are 3 of these in Nevada. They're all built between 1954 and 1955, including the Nevada Drive-in in North Las Vegas, shown here, the additional, and the Sagecrest Drive-in in Yerington, and the Roper Drive-in in Fallon. And because these were all built in the mid-1950s, it's possible they were influenced by the AASHO traffic safety plans. So that's one link that we found. Plan type 3 drive-ins are similar in shape to the Plan type 2, but the fan is flipped so that the ticket booth and main entrance face the screen at the rear of the parking berms. There were 5 of these discovered in Nevada, all built between 1947 and 1966. The image on the left is the El Rancho West Wind Drive-in in Sparks prior to its expansion, and this one's still open today, as I mentioned before. Additional type 3s include the Las Vegas West Wind, the Skyway in Las Vegas, which has now been covered by Boulder Station. And as you can see, the Las Vegas West Wind opened in 1966 with 1 screen. It grew to 6 screens by 1991, representing, that progression of drive-ins growing as popularity waned. And more type 3s, the Motor View Stardust Drive-in in Las Vegas, currently a parking garage for Resorts World, and the Skyview Drive-in in Carson City is currently a shopping center. Only 2 theaters, the Spooner Drive-in in Carson City, now the Carson City Fairgrounds, and the Desert 5 Drive-in in Las Vegas, were constructed as Plan type 4s with more than 1 screen and parking area. Both were opened in the early to mid 1970s. Both are examples of an attempt at maximizing profits. Again, the Desert 5's main entrance, this one's kind of interesting, led to a clever and slightly more monumental round concession and projection building that eliminated the need for, an awkwardly shaped or even 5 projection booths. By 1989, the Desert 5 had been completely converted to an indoor theater and renamed the Century Desert 12. It was later expanded to 16 screens, and now it's a school. So let's talk about the Sagecrest, the whole reason for this, for our paper and this presentation. So the Sagecrest was located in Yerington. It's an example of an early 1950s drive-in theater. And despite alterations since its initial opening in 1952, it retains much of its historic integrity. It was really an important recreational landscape for the local community. And I feel like that's probably the case for a lot of these rural and, well, I mean, probably all drive-in theaters. In 1951, the Anaconda Company established a large copper mine a few miles west of town, bringing people and money to this predominantly agricultural area. And it also built the Weed Heights town site near the operation to house mine workers. The town site incorporated all the trappings of 1950s modernity, had a trailer court, tennis and basketball courts, baseball diamond, swimming pool, 9-hole golf course, park, and playground, but no drive-in theater. So you can see that the Sagecrest Drive-in Theater was located near the main highway outside of town. This was typical for theaters at this time. In 1960, Yerington's population was 1,764, and Weed Heights added another 1,100 persons. Inspired by the recent population and economic boom, Yerington native and resident Gina Perry leased a site near the mine in the spring of 1952 to construct a drive-in theater for the Yerington and Weed Heights communities. The drive-in opened with space for between 200 and 300 cars. The main entrance connected from Alt US 95. However, as you can see in the enlarged inset on the right, there were several unmaintained roads that led to and from the theater in all directions. Parking rows were bermed and marked by a post and speaker configuration until 1995 when they were using in-car radios. So Gina, she was a local businesswoman who also operated the indoor Yerington Theater and a few other ventures in town, some of which she operated with her husband, Peter Perry. It wasn't uncommon for operators of drive-ins to operate indoor theaters as well, because it sometimes allowed you to show the first run movies at the drive-ins. She deserves her own slide because how she ran her businesses reinforces the idea of drive-ins being an important social outlet for the community and like a very connecting outlet. She was known for having a strong work ethic and passing that along to her young employees. She gave back to her community. She had free annual matinees for local children, cartoons before all movies, when other theaters had given up that practice quite a while ago. And of course, near and dear to my and my team's heart, she also fed and cared for the stray animals that visited the theater concession stand. Young moviegoers remember being caught trying to sneak into the Sagecrest through one of those roads that was kind of surrounding the theater. They might be caught in intimate situations with a bright light and a stern warning of "not in my theater," followed by a tap on the head with a flashlight if warnings were ignored. Per Carl Nesbitt, a former Weed Heights resident and former Anaconda metallurgical engineer, people would try to sneak into the movies by driving over the hill, but they were always caught because they had to use their lights to see the road. He said that the drive-in was really preferred to the indoor Yerington Theater because you could walk, through the vehicles and visit friends and catch up on gossip. It was more about socializing than the actual movie. He recalls, I don't want to get anybody in trouble, but he recalls smuggling as many of his friends and beer as possible into his vehicle, often with a smaller person sitting under his leg while he drove, and he would stuff several people in the trunk. The drive-in was an important social activity that his entire family could enjoy, and you can see, how important it was to the residents of Yerington and Weed Heights. So the Sagecrest had a ticket booth and a projection booth with restroom facilities, a completely stocked snack bar, and a steel and wood frame screen. The projection and concession building was pretty typical, simple kind of boxy building with a flat roof, which is why the round one with the dome shape was really interesting at the Vegas one. The Sagecrest Drive-in did not have an elaborate neon sign. An article in the Mason Valley News from 1989 about the reopening of the renamed Mason Valley Drive-in Shows an image of a wood structure with a triangular footprint with marquee panels. And this structure, without the signboards, remains on the Sagecrest property. Through the 1950s, advertisements were posted in the local news to announce the season's opening day, which was typically either May or June. In the 1950s, movies were typically Westerns or war movies. Through the late 1960s, the drive-in posted new showings weekly, and they would, initially they were combined with the Yerington Theater showings. Shows started at dusk. The theater would remain open in the season for as long as it could, closing when it got cold, like September or October. And advertisements throughout the decade show that almost all of the movies shown at the Sagecrest were showing about 1 year after they premiered, until the 1990s when they became more current. And I personally love the "Don't Go to Reno" on the 1992 ad. It wasn't really necessary to go to Reno because all of the movies shown on this ad were released the same year. And also, interestingly, in the 1990s, we're starting to see more, movie promotional graphics introduced into the ads. In addition to programming, Ms. Perry would occasionally solicit community support via the local news in the form of donations or sponsorships. And despite, setbacks, she continued to invest in the theater. This image from 1969 shows locals Jim Grow and Chris Miller painting the screen. However, the closure of the Anaconda copper mine in 1978 had a devastating impact on Yerington's economy. It resulted in an outflux of people, and the death of Regina Perry's husband and business partner, Peter Perry, in 1979 likely impacted the continued success of the drive-in. In 1983, it was posted for sale, but it continued to operate through 1985 with reduced days. And by 1988, the drive-in was pretty much abandoned. The following year, Mike Wiley and Joe Beelm, operators of the indoor Meadowdale Twin Theater in Gardnerville, leased the property from Gina Perry. They made some improvements. They renamed it the Mason Valley Drive-In, and they planned to show current movies. Admission would be $5 per car and as many in the trunk as you want. Per Beelm, they were doing this more for the community, stating that they wanted to give the local teenagers something to do in town rather than traveling to Carson City or Reno. Again, there's this sense of responsibility for giving back to the community, knowing how important it is as a social event for the whole community. The grand opening was on July 1989, but it didn't operate past the first season, even with first-run movies. The theater sold again in 1991 to production entrepreneur Gary Mike Smith, who renamed it back to the Sagecrest. He hired the Shirelles and the Coasters, which were pretty big-name bands at the time. Or actually, they were big-name bands, a few years prior to that, but they were still pretty well-known, and they performed at the drive-in on weekends. To attract the Latino population, he showed Spanish-language films on Sundays. However, by June of that year, he was advertising year-round swap meets and flea markets at the drive-in. This is kind of the death knell of drive-ins we see. It closed for the season in mid-October, and then it was really open for one more season before activity went silent. In 1995, it was purchased again, and an in-car radio sound system was improved, and this was the first improvement to the sound system since it opened in 1952, but in spite of these upgrades, it was placed on the market that year, and it was repurchased by Mike Wiley at the end of July 1995. However, the kind of nail in the coffin for the drive-in was a public notice that the owners did not submit a bacteriological water sample for total coliform analysis, and after that, it was officially closed for good and completely abandoned. So, as part of the research that we did, we recovered some artifacts from the site, and we have Rachel Pober, who's the senior archaeologist for Broadbent, and she's going to take over this presentation and talk about what we found as she did all the artifact analysis. And Rachel, please just tell me next slide when you're ready, but I will. Do you want to talk on this slide, or shall I move forward?
Oh, I can do a little bit of an introduction.
Okay.
So, as Courtney mentions, we did complete excavations at the Sagecrest Drive-in Theater, In addition to the still existing infrastructure at the site, there were also 4 historic artifact concentrations, along with a general scatter of historic artifacts throughout the drive-in theater area. Artifacts from the assemblage consist of 2 main groups, artifacts associated with drive-in theater infrastructure and concessions, and then artifacts associated with personal use. Personal use in this instance is referring to anything like worn, such as jewelry or clothing, things associated with that, or even things that you were carried or utilized in your daily life. Next slide. So as Courtney stated earlier in the presentation, neon signage was utilized for advertising by drive-in theaters. Up in the upper left of the slide, you can see all the neon light bulb fragments that were found during the excavation. While in operation, the Sagecrest Drive-in Theater did have neon signs and would need to probably change out the light bulbs as they were utilized. In addition to the neon light fragments, wiring and concrete were identified. The speakers utilized concrete stands or pylons, and the wires were then attached to the speakers. The Sagecrest Drive-in Theater artifact assemblage did have a variety of cans, glass bottles, and wrappers from concessions. Drive-in concession stands provided a variety of food products. That would include beverage bottles from a variety of time periods representing the various periods of use of the Sagecrest Drive-in Theater. So here in that lower right-hand corner is a variety of bottles that were found specifically for beverages, including the can, which is a root beer, for root beer, and then the other 3 are for beer. As well as the cans and bottles that were found, there was a bottle opener found as well within the artifact assemblage. Also pictured here are 2 pieces of carnation ice cream bar wrappers, which were found. And then some other additional artifacts of note associated with this type of artifact were 1-gallon higher syrup cans, various types of glass soda bottles, ceramic tableware, and multiple Farmer Brothers coffee carafe metal bands. Next slide. So the artifact assemblage at the Sagecrest Drive-in Theater did include many personal items, with a few pictured here. In the upper left-hand corner, you can see that there is a gas key. Gas keys were carried at the time for opening, locking gas caps that were part of the vehicle. In the lower right-hand corner, just below there, there's a jade pendant with a floral design that was also found. And then right next to that is a picture of the top of the lipstick case that's shown below with the embossed dewberry. The lipstick case that's shown here is a dewberry showcase lipstick, and it has a unique history. The lipstick case was styled after the popular Revlon Futurama lipstick. The model, Susie Parker, for the Revlon Futurama lipstick ad campaign was also featured in the Dewberry Showcase advertisements, and the Dewberry Showcase was marketed as a down-market option of the Revlon Futurama lipstick. As well as the lipstick case, there were other cosmetics such as nail polish. So you can see the bottom of the Revlon nail polish bottle with the picture of the Revlon nail polish bottle that looks the same as the Revlon nail polish bottles that you can buy today. And then other beauty products also included curl cream, and which we found of this packet shown here. And this also included glass cosmetic jars as well. Another thing that was a personal item of use is glasses, such as this wire glasses frame that was found, along with other fragments of sunglass lenses that were also found at the site. Fasteners such as zippers, buttons, and snaps were found in the excavation from clothing, and you can see that there's a zipper and a glass button pictured here. So the artifacts of the drive-in theater represent another aspect of the drive-in theater legacy in telling stories about the use of the theater and the type of food products that were consumed during attendance. And I'll hand it back to Courtney.
Well, muted. Okay. That concludes our presentation, and we hope you enjoyed the discussion about the Nevada theaters. I grew up in Carson City, and I remember the Spooner Drive-in most of all, going there when I was a kid with my family, and that was pretty exciting. So I don't know if anybody else has specific memories about drive-ins in Nevada, especially since we didn't visit some of these. Actually, most of them we didn't really visit. We just looked at historic aerials and newspaper articles and things like that. It was really difficult to find a lot of information on them. So it might be, interesting if you have any memories you'd like to share in the time we have left.
Okay. There's a bunch of stuff about the West Wind.
Yeah, I've been there for a couple of movies and a couple of swap meet type things.
They also have flea markets and
I see Mom and Dad is legally available in full on Internet Archive. Now I'm going to have to watch it. There was a couple of I ran across one called The Innocents, and it was about these two young men who went into town and they pressured they went into town and they hooked up with fast women, and then one of them accidentally passed on an STD to his girlfriend that he pressured into sex, and then he had to tell everyone that he had syphilis. And this was in the 50s, I think, which is really interesting.
All right, there's a couple of questions mixed in here.
Okay.
Are any of the old sites covered under ARPA as historic sites?
Not that I know of, but that might be a Rachel or Margot question. Rachel, do you know?
At least from my reading, not yet. I mean, we're getting closer to that time period, but we're not quite there yet for specifically drive-in theaters.
Yeah, I think ARPA is 100 years or older.
It is 100 years or older, yes. So maybe in 10 more years.
Another question, are there any other extant drive-in besides the Sagecrest and the West Winds?
Well, not really, no. There you can see that hold on just one second. You can see, some of them you can see the like the outline of the drive-in theater, the parking area. And a couple of them just recently had buildings until very recently. Like if you look at Google Earth or Google Street View, you'll see the projection buildings or the concession stands, and then they're gone. So the Sagecrest is actually one of the better, more intact ones. Let me see if I can just quickly scan this. It looks like the Roper in Fallon has a little bit of a part of the frame and the concession stand and projection booth in the berms, but this might be the one I'm thinking of that the concession stand is gone.
Yeah. Margot said the Rancho in Reno.
Oh, right. Well, yeah, that's a West Wind. I think. Yeah.
Came across the neon museum.
Oh, wow. The Skyway actually offered free gas.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is cool.
They actually turned a burger place down the street from my office into a drive-in theater, but it only has one screen and there's like only enough room for like 5 cars. Yeah, Snappies.
Oh yeah. Dead batteries. I think, I mean, I don't know, but I didn't see anything specific, but I feel like, I mean, you would, probably be able to get a jump from somebody there, or, they might have, somebody that would come out and do, I think that would be a smart thing, is if somebody could come out and give you a jump. But I didn't didn't run into any of that specifically in the research.
I guess also on dead batteries, like dead batteries for equipment and other things utilized at the theater, we did find quite a few dead battery cores at the site itself. So
Interesting.
I guess they
Well,
would
and
just
you mentioned
dump it with the rest of the trash.
You mentioned quite a lot of car parts, like mufflers and things.
Yeah, man, quite a few headlight fragments actually as well within what was found at the site.
I guess bombing over those informal roads to get down into the Sagecrest, you lost a muffler every now and then.
Yeah, maybe also like hitting those concrete pylons to pull into your site. I don't know.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of things that could probably have caused like the loss of some car parts. I would be sad about the gas key though. You know, you got to get in there to be able to pump your gas and make your car run.
Go gas.
Yeah.
Somebody actually said that they had a jump at the West Wind recently.
Yeah. That's funny. Now that I don't live there, I feel I regret not going there more to see the movies. It was fun. It's interesting about the Craig Road. That's the West Wind, right? It was built over an early pond. I think that's the West Wind.
That's interesting.
I also loved the story about the kids watching the adult films over their phones. At some point, you got to read the room, I guess, if you're going to show that on a huge screen in a residential area. Yeah, I really think that, the oral histories and, the stories about these drive-ins are so key to telling just the overall story of the drive-ins. It's such a different experience in an indoor movie theater. And we were so lucky to be able to talk to Carl Nesbitt and have, a firsthand story about his experiences.
Got a couple of people typing.
Yep, I see it. I see the bubbles.
This one became reinvigorated. The redevelopment of the area, Texas Station. Yes. Turning it into a huge.
Oh yeah, that's right. Feeding pizzas to the wild foxes at the Sagecrest. It's cool.
That's actually a question, though, if the West Wind will be reinvigorated. Maybe. I think they need to advertise more so that people actually know and they can go for nostalgia's sake.
Yeah, we had talked about, renting it at one point for an event and showing, movies that we had picked out, but it was kind of expensive if I recall. But I think that would be a fun thing to do, like another way to utilize the drive-ins.
That would be cool.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow.
Cool.
Yeah, that'd be really cool. I would have thought that drive-ins would have just instantly popped up during COVID. Like movies weren't doing that well, and you could sit outside and watch the movies. So I don't know.
I think they did. There's a couple documentaries actually from that time period of them talking about the resurgence of drive-in movie theaters. I think there's 3 different ones.
Okay.
The documentaries are actually quite interesting because they follow around different people who wind up opening up drive-in movie theaters across the country in different places. So pretty interesting. So it sounds like there was a resurgence during that time period because it was outside and you could be in your vehicle and.
That's cool.
It is really cool.
That makes sense. I think they're so important to these rural communities, you know. It's not a lot to do in some of these places.
Very true. Okay. Well, I'm going to start winding us up, but Joanne, if you want to finish your typing, that'd be awesome. Okay. Oh, cool.
That's cool. I'll check that out.
Yeah. COVID stuff. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start wrapping everything up, but I want to say thank you guys for so much for coming and talking about this. This was really interesting and very different from what we usually do. So it was pretty cool to learn about. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks everyone.